Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're wading into one of the most highly charged debates you can imagine. We're talking geopolitics, civilizational duty, and the very limits of international law.
That's right. We've been handed a set of documents, primarily authored by Ryan Badia, and they present this profound and honestly pretty explosive argument.
An argument for India's military intervention in Bangladesh.
Exactly. So our mission today is really to dissect the logic in these sources, mainly R2P doctrine Bangladesh and reclaiming Dharma Bangladesh.
And the central idea they're putting forward is what exactly?
It's that India, which the source describes as the torchbearer of the Indic civilization, has a duty to consider using armed forces.
To protect the Hindu minority in Bangladesh.
To ensure their survival and dignity is the phrase they use. And they're leveraging this concept called the responsibility to protect, or R2P.
Right, R2P. So the idea that if a state fails to protect its own people from, say, mass atrocities,
the international community has to step in. That's the core of it. But they're grounding this in something much, much deeper than just modern diplomacy.
Yeah, this isn't just a political choice for them, is it? It's presented as a historical and moral imperative.
It really forces us to confront this fundamental tension that the sources explore so well. How far does a nation's duty extend beyond its own borders?
Especially when it sees a population across that border as its cultural kin facing, an existential threat.
It's the ultimate clash, isn't it? State sovereignty on one side and this idea of a global, or in this case, a regional human rights obligation on the other.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start where the authors do, which is with a historical foundation. For them, it all begins with the 1947 partition.
And they are absolutely scathing about it. They refuse to treat partition as just some settled historical event.
No, they call it a political and selfish decision driven by greed.
Exactly, and that it created unnatural borders. For them, it was the ultimate betrayal of the masses who were just left on the wrong side. This isn't just history in a book.
It's an open wound, a moral injury.
A moral injury, that's a perfect way to put it. And this perspective is so crucial because it assigns responsibility directly back to modern India.
Right. The sources argue that the Hindus left in what was then East Bengal were essentially abandoned when those borders were drawn. So modern India, the motherland as they frame it, has this obligation to rectify that specific historical wrong.
And when you see the demographic data they cite, you really start to grasp the scale of the tragedy they're responding to.
It's just stunning. So in 1947, at partition, the Hindu population in East Bengal was nearly 30%.
30%. Just let that sink in. Today, that number it's just plummeted to less than 10%.
Wow. I mean, that is an enormous, rapid demographic collapse in a region that was once a cultural heartland.
And the sources are very clear on this. They completely reject the idea that this is just, natural migration or economic stuff.
They call it what it is.
They say this 20% drop is the result of decades of systematic, continuous persecution. We're talking waves of ethnic cleansing, forced conversions, destroying temples.
And illegal land grabs, right? Targeting minority families. They present it as this ongoing, accelerating disaster.
Yes, and what's really unique about their argument is that they don't just dwell on history, they point to an immediate catalyst.
The political vacuum created after the overthrow of the Sheikh Hasina government in November 2024. That's when they say the crisis just spiked.
That political instability created the perfect storm. The reports they cite show that various Islamist groups saw this power vacuum as an opportunity, and it led to a demonstrable surge in violence.
Targeted specifically at Hindu communities.
Specifically. The sources document atrocities like arson, physical attacks, abductions, and they note these acts were often carried out with, and I'm quoting, alarming impunity. The state was either collapsed or just totally overwhelmed.
So it sounds like they're painting a picture of deliberate, coordinated violence, not just random lawlessness.
Oh, absolutely. They provide explicit evidence for that claim of systemic targeting. They detail attacks on entire Hindu villages.
And they mention video evidence, eyewitness accounts.
Confirming organized mobs, setting homes on fire, displacing thousands, all in that short period of political chaos. And there's one really striking detail they use.
The rally.
The rally of 30,000 Hindus, terrified, demanding protection. It just underscores the extreme level of fear in that community.
And this is the moment, right, where the history and the facts hit that sharp legal trigger. The source argues these ongoing atrocities meet the criteria for
genocide and ethnic cleansing under international law.
That's a huge claim to make.
It is, but for the authors, it's not hyperbole. It's a legal and moral fact, and if you accept that classification, the entire argument pivots.
India's policy of non-intervention, or even silence, it starts to look like complicity.
That's precisely their point. They state plainly that to watch the annihilation of your cultural kin right next door, especially with the shared history of partition, well, that's a profound moral failure.
So once the history provides the gravity and the current crisis provides the urgency, the sources shift to the philosophical. They start framing India as more than just a political entity.
They move from the political to the civilizational. The source calls India the cradle of one of the world's oldest civilizations. This framing elevates the proposed action from just a regional power play
To an act of civilizational maintenance.
Yes, and central to that idea is the concept of dharma.
Right, reclaiming Dharma. When they use that word, what exactly are they loading into it? It's more than just righteousness, isn't it?
Oh, much deeper. They argue India must act as a beacon of dharma, its righteous duty, its cosmic and social order. It's about being the ultimate guardian of its civilization and its values.
So it's not just about protecting a minority group.
No, it's about fulfilling a foundational, non-negotiable moral mandate on the global stage. For them, if India fails to protect its civilization where it's facing destruction, then India itself has failed its own identity.
So they use history to create the injury and philosophy to create the duty. But, I mean, the authors know that duty alone doesn't move state policy.
Not in the real world, no. So they immediately connect this moral foundation to hard, strategic self-interest. They bring it right back to India's national security.
Making the case that doing the right thing is also the smart thing.
Absolutely. The argument is that persecution in Bangladesh is intrinsically destabilizing to India, period. Morality aside.
Okay, let's break down those strategic points. First, the most immediate one, border stability.
Right. Persecution creates refugees. That destabilizes India's borders, especially in the sensitive eastern states.
And that influx, they argue, fuels communal tensions inside India.
Which creates a domestic security vulnerability that's both expensive and politically corrosive. So by intervening to stop the root cause, the persecution in India is actually managing its own internal security.
It's proactive foreign policy as a domestic defense.
Exactly. And then there's the second strategic point they make, which is deterrence. This is where the argument really expands India's global role.
How so?
Well, the source argues that a decisive, successful intervention would. It would define India's position as a serious global power. And, more importantly, it would send a powerful message to other nations.
A message not to mistreat minorities of Indian origin anywhere else.
Yes. It transforms India from a reactive regional player into a proactive, reliable protector of its diaspora and its cultural heritage worldwide.
That connects pretty neatly to the legal justification then, because they have to know that critics will immediately cry foul over violating Bangladesh's sovereignty.
They do, and to counter that, they lean heavily on the responsibility to protect doctrine on R2P.
But they're kind of weaponizing it, aren't they?
Right.
R2P is usually for collective UN action. They're using it to justify unilateral regional action.
That's the core of their legal defense. They say when a state like Bangladesh is unable or unwilling to protect its citizens from genocide, the right to intervene passes to the international community, or a regional power.
And they tackle the sovereignty argument head on. They keep mentioning this global dilemma concept.
Which is that sovereignty is not a shield for genocide.
Right.
That's the critical distinction. If a state uses sovereignty to hide mass atrocities, that contract is broken. And intervention becomes not aggression, but restorative justice under international norms.
And to bolster this claim, they point to historical precedents. The first one is, well, undeniable in that region. India's own intervention in 1971.
Which is a powerful precedent. It proves India has a historical mandate for this kind of humanitarian intervention right there. They then cite NATO's intervention in Kosovo in 1999.
Another famous example of intervention without explicit UN approval to stop ethnic cleansing.
Right. And then, most controversially, they bring up Russia's intervention in Crimea in 2014.
Okay, now that is a massive leap. How do they possibly justify connecting an action like Crimea with 1971 in Kosovo?
Well, it's a risky move, but they include it not to endorse its legality, but to show that powerful nations have invoked the need to protect ethnic kin as a rationale for action.
So they're just saying, look, it happens.
They're saying it has happened repeatedly. And the question they pose is, if others have acted for their stated reasons, Why should India hold itself to a higher, paralyzing standard when its own cultural kin face what the sources label systematic annihilation?
It's a fascinating, if very risky, rhetorical strategy. Okay, so we've got the historical duty, the moral mandate, the legal framework. Now, the pragmatics. How would this intervention actually look?
The sources are careful here. They propose a measured three-part strategy. They insist it must be precise, targeted, and humanitarian. This isn't framed as a war of conquest.
Right, so step one is diplomatic preparation.
Yes. They say India must exhaust all diplomatic channels first, present their evidence to the UN, seek global support, solidify their moral standing.
And only if that fails, they move to Part B, targeted military operations.
And this is where it gets tricky. They envision establishing secure, enforceable safe zones for Hindus inside Bangladesh.
Deploying forces to protect cultural sites and, critically, neutralizing the extremist groups responsible.
Right. And targeted operation sounds easy on paper, but the logistics of that without a full military occupation.
It would almost certainly be seen as an invasion.
That's the central challenge, and the sources kind of gloss over it. They suggest modern military tech makes it possible, but it's a very idealized vision. They stress the goal is protection, not regime change.
And Part C, the aftermath, reconstruction and reintegration.
Which is crucial. The source says post-intervention, India would need to work with the restructured Bangladeshi government to rebuild minority communities and ensure long-term stability.
To show it was a temporary measure aimed at lasting peace.
Exactly. It ties a bow on the R2P requirement, showing a commitment to the victims, not just a cynical power grab.
Of course, a plan this drastic comes with monumental risks. The sources do address the blowback, right?
They do. They identify two main threats. First is the risk of escalation.
Straining India-Bangladesh relations for generations, drawing international condemnation, sanctions.
All of it. The authors basically dismiss this by saying, decisive leadership demands taking risks for a greater cause. They frame it as a necessary cost for fulfilling Dharma.
Okay. And the second challenge they see is the perception of bias. Domestic backlash.
Yes, the risk that the intervention is seen as purely religiously motivated instead of humanitarian.
And what's their solution for that?
This is their strongest mitigating point. They insist India must frame its actions by emphasizing a commitment to universal human rights.
Meaning the protective umbrella has to extend to all persecuted minorities in Bangladesh. Christians, Buddhists.
Not just Hindus, exactly. By doing that, they try to redefine the action as defending universal values, making India a regional guarantor of protection, not communal partisan.
A framing designed to manage the political fallout while still achieving the primary goal.
Precisely. They're trying to achieve a geopolitical goal using a moral shield.
Ultimately, the source concludes this whole plan with a powerful, almost spiritual vision of justice. They say intervention wouldn't be aggression. It would be a fulfillment of duty.
Sending a message that Bharat Mata Mother India does not abandon her children. It's a call for India to redefine its role on the global stage, to become a proactive leader defending human rights and its own civilizational heritage.
So what does this all mean for you? We've just taken a deep dive into an argument that pits state sovereignty against this moral, historical call for intervention under R2P. The sources make a detailed, compelling, and yes, highly controversial case that the situation in Bangladesh demands a moral reckoning from India.
And they conclude with this powerful link that brings the whole argument back home, connecting the external crisis to India's own internal identity. They argue that the ultimate condition for internal stability rests on external will.
So the claim is that India can only ensure the protection of Sanatan Dharma within its own borders.
If is willing and able to protect it outside those borders.
That shifts the focus entirely. It suggests failing to act abroad is ultimately a failure of India's domestic identity and its own security. It's an argument that frames regional intervention as a prerequisite for national self-actualization.
It is. And it raises that essential question for any major power. Can a nation truly separate its own domestic stability from the fate of its cultural heritage in neighboring regions?
A profound and challenging thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into this incredibly challenging source material. We'll see you next time.